This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice.
All right, quickly, before our co-host gets here, Emerald, what's your slap take?
Do we need to do context?
Well, everyone knows the context. Will Smith slapped Chris Rock in the fucking face at the Oscars. It was the greatest day on Twitter. It's been the best week on Twitter for a very long time, I would argue. It's been really good.
I was disappointed that the budget cut into this discourse, you know?
Look, I'm sure people are sick to death of various slap takes or whatever, but to me it got interesting when like Ozpol and the world of the slap intersected. Young liberals posting a meme showing Will Smith is Labor's higher taxes and Chris Rock is hardworking Australians. And so Labor is slapping
hardworking Australians in the face. Absolutely, but not with higher taxes.
Well, I mean, again, it's just like I'm so glad that once again Labor had caved on the tax cuts for the rich, because then then the Liberals would never attack them in any way for taxes. So
yeah, that's right.
That's really good that they avoided.
Yeah. I don't know how they let that one through. I thought they'd got rid of any possible attack line, but
yeah, it's weird.
Maybe not.
The best one, though, was Malcolm Roberts, Queensland One Nation senator, who tweeted a meme in which Will Smith is switching the grid to renewables.
Okay.
And Chris Rock is your power bill.
Oh, so awesome. So switching the grid to renewables, that's going to smash your fucking power bill. You know what? Malcolm Roberts, welcome to the revolution.
Welcome to the revolution, man. That's a real turnaround with him. What about Morrison? Morrison has sensationally claimed he understands why Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars, given he is also protective of his wife, Jenny. The Prime Minister made the comment on Brisbane radio on Thursday morning after he was asked if he ever felt the need to cross the floor to slap someone in Parliament. I'm also fiercely defensive of anyone who would say anything about Jenny too, so I can understand it. But he added, that's not how you roll.
That's not how you roll. I like to, just imagining Morrison sitting on the front bench in Parliament, just yelling at, Albanese or maybe the Speaker or something, get my fucking wife out of your mouth.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
They want to destroy the social fabric of society.
Well, the Greens get way too good a run in the Australian media.
And I'm not suggesting the Greens are terrorists. I'm suggesting they hate our society.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
All right, let's do it. This is Serious Danger. This is a show about Greens politics in Australia. This is not an official Greens Party podcast. This is not endorsed by Jay McCall for the Australian Greens, FYI. It's me, it's Emerald, and it's a very special guest co-host for the entire episode. This week, Greens candidate for the Queensland seat of Griffith, currently held by Labor's Shadow Environment Minister Terry Butler on a margin of less than 3%. He's out there door knocking his ass off. Max-Chandler Mather, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. Very excited to be on the inaugural, absolutely official, 100% real and authorized podcast.
Authorized.
Max, we just clarified. What?
God damn it.
Tell the good people who aren't familiar with who you are, how the Griffith campaign is going. I know, if people follow you on social media, you'll know that you are a door-knocking fiend and that you're out there constantly talking to people all over the place about the amazing vision that the Greens have for the future of the election. How's it all fucking going? Yeah,
really good. I should say the margin is 3.5%. Just because, these exact numbers, if we lose by 0.5%, I'll blame you, Tom.
Oh, fuck!
Because of this podcast.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because of this podcast. That extra 0.5% of people in Griffith will hear Tom's 3% margin and think, well, I don't have to shift, and I'll blame you. So I'm the Greens candidate for Griffith, as Tom said. Griffith is a inner city seat in Brisbane on the south side of the river, for those interstate listeners. We've been campaigning for about 12 months now. We've essentially ended up building the biggest campaign in Australian political history, certainly in the Greens. We've knocked on over 50,000 doors now, had close to 18,000 one-on-one conversations. So that's where volunteers go to people's doors, or I do, and ask people about the issues in their lives and how Greens policies will improve them. We've also run these massive community campaigns, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, it's going very well. I'm very tired in case your listeners can't hear or see, but it's going extremely well.
I want to know, Max, how many conversations you have had so far this week. This is Friday.
I think
I'm sure you have a count.
I think I've had just over 100 conversations.
Pathetic. How are you going to win like that?
I know. Well, yeah.
Has anyone on the door been asking you about the budget and our debt and deficit disaster and the very nature of the country's finances? Does anyone give a fuck about that?
Every conversation, actually, Tom, it's like they're just terrified about the debt and deficit. They're wondering how we're going to balance the books. This week, I think I've had, out of the 100 conversations, probably 2 people have explicitly mentioned the budget.
Really?
Yeah, probably about 2. And in both those instances, people just mentioned fuel excise tax cuts.
Wow.
Most people door knock even this week will say, oh, are you for the state or federal? And I'll say, oh, federal. And they're like, oh, is there a federal election coming? I'm like, yes.
Amazing.
That is crazy because I know it takes a long time, but like last night I was watching SBS News, and I know that not, mainstream Australia doesn't watch SBS News or whatever, but during an entire ad break, every single ad was either an Australian government ad about their economic plans, saving jobs and steering us into the future, or was from fucking Clive Palmer. Like it was like there wasn't a single commercial ad during that entire ad break. It was all political wall to wall. And so again, even if you just, living your life and you're not engaged with politics really at all, these messages are sort of being shoved down your throat a lot. But obviously most people, or a lot of people, are not necessarily living in that world yet.
No, I've noticed a slight tick up in engagement. So there's like a few more people who are like, they're like, oh yeah, I suppose there should be an election soon. Have I missed it being called, or like, is it happening soon? There is a wild, like, I think Emerald, you tweeted about it yesterday, that being like, there's a small group of like 200 people who are like just obsessed. But I think we just run into this all the time. People don't have any expectations that politics will do anything for their lives that is good. So their reaction is largely to switch off, which is, I would argue, is an entirely sane and reasonable thing to do with Australian politics. And it's our job to go and build an organisation and, reach out to them with some sort of hope and path to positive change.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that the one thing that those 2% brought up was the fuel excise. Like, obviously that's extremely depressing, but it does show that, I guess, that cost of living stuff, which is the main frame, I think, around this budget, is the only thing that's even minorly cutting through. But I'm surprised because there's the fuel excise being cut in half to 22 cents for the next 6 months. But there's also cash payments. Like there's the $250 for people on income support. There's the $420 for low and middle income earners. So no one knew that those were even happening?
Not anyone I spoke to. Certainly probably the one-off cash payment, I reckon there would be some people, it may be that I just didn't speak to anyone, for instance, that was on JobSeeker or any government benefits. I think partly because tax cuts in particular are often abstract, and because that's the low-income tax offset, which they won't get until their tax return.
Yeah.
Probably they just either abstractly aren't aware of it or don't think that it'll happen, are probably the two things. Yeah, it's interesting. By and large, what you end up talking about with people, and it's certainly this week has been pretty much the same, is the first thing you need to acknowledge is just that people hate politics. And so a lot of the chats have just been vaguely about how crap politics is.
Surprising.
And then people will just pick out stuff on the fly, they'll be like, oh, dental to Medicare, that's great. One lady said it really well. I was like, yeah, politics is completely disconnected from our lives. And she's like, yeah, you know what? I suppose it's something that you just watch on telly and that's it.
Yeah,
oh, God.
Fuck, yeah. Oh, is the politics show on? Like, yeah. I really like this one, but I guess it's playing, so we'll watch a little bit.
Yeah, literally.
I'll binge politics. Yeah, great.
But I've been thinking about this because I feel like people with, deeply broken politics brains like us are like, okay, cost of living is a big issue. And so like, all the little government advisors go, okay, cost of living, how do we make it a cost of living budget? And we talk about cost of living, but that's like, to me, that's a kind of a political term. I wonder even if people kind of phrase it that way to themselves, like think about it like that to themselves. Like surely people are just like, things are expensive. I can't buy a house. I'm not going to go to the dentist. There's even when politicians try to address it, they don't really.
No, exactly. And like, I think the few people that bring up cost of living, they bring it up because they're like, oh, you're a politician, you're from politics. I hear cost of living, so I should probably cost of living. In terms of that, like the big stuff is housing.
Yeah.
That's the biggest consistent issue that you'll get up at the door, whether it's renters or like in particular first home buyers terrified about not being able to buy a house, or really parents of kids, like even in middle class areas, who are terrified about how their kids are ever going to be able to buy a house. The philosophy basically is that because people don't think politics can do anything, like it's utterly incapable and disconnected from their lives and not capable of any positive improvement. Like if politics does something, then it does something negative. And so you ask someone what their issues are. They may be on low wages. They may be struggling to pay rent. They may be living week to week, sometimes having to choose between paying the food or feeding the kids. They may be really terrified about how they're going to meet the next mortgage payment. For them, none of that's political because politics doesn't fix any of that.
Yeah.
And so if you say you're from the Greens, they shut all of that section off of their lives. And so you have to work so hard to get back to being like, oh, but how's your week going? Or do you rent or do you own? Oh, yeah. How are the rent payments? Are they going right? You know, what do you do for work? Oh, I'm a teacher. Oh, you must be super overworked. And then all of a sudden you're talking about funding of public education. And it's this like slow process of stepping people through the fact that they should have higher expectations of politics.
Yeah.
If an entire generation is locked out of the housing market and stable housing, then we should be angry at politicians about that, not just, you know, like vaguely disconnected and expel, well, that's, you know, what are they going to do? I would say our biggest barrier and our biggest job, the biggest barrier is low expectations. Our biggest job is raising expectations.
Well, let's talk about it a little bit because obviously people listening to this podcast are somewhat engaged and they're politics brained and they're broken freaks like us. So without getting bogged down into the details too much, I mean, what are your general strokes response to the budget that was announced on Tuesday? Greens leader Adam Bandt described it as a budget of bribes that funds coal and gas and makes housing more expensive. I think the Greens have also been going on the tack about, you know, these stage 3 tax cuts, which we've talked about on the show before, that is just going to make this country more unequal, $180 billion away to some of the highest earners, the millionaires and billionaires in this country. What are your big takeaway impressions that people should know about this budget, and should we give a fuck about it at all?
Probably the biggest takeaway is it's a continuation of the status quo. Like, I think one of the things as the scope, like certainly the difference between the Labor and Liberal Party shrinks, that we keep having to pick at the smaller and smaller differences between them to highlight why this budget, for instance, is really significant.
Yeah.
But if you look at the fundamentals economically, there is not actually any substantial difference between Labor and the Liberals' economic position, nor has there been for the last certainly 10, 20 years, really, except on the fringes. And yeah, there's that $38 billion of subsidies for fossil fuel corporations via the diesel fuel exemption. Essentially, they're exempt from paying the fuel excise completely. That's $38 billion over 4 years. Both major parties support that. That policy's been in place forever. Mining corporations draw on it all the time. Stage 3 tax cuts, that's probably the biggest thing locked into the budget are the stage 3 tax cuts, which are essentially flattening the tax rate and lowering the tax rate for people up to and over $200,000 a year. Like someone on $250,000 a year is locked in to get a $9,000 a year tax cut. Both major parties support it. My view of the budget is that yeah, it's shocking and bad, like every budget has been for a long time, in that it doesn't address the housing crisis. It pumps money into the housing market for investors, hands over money hand over fist to fuel corporations and shoves more money into the hands of billionaires. But then we've seen that again and again and again.
Yeah.
And so I find it hard to get really excitedly angry because it's, you know, it's what we expect from them.
Well, then get the fuck off the podcast, Max. What are you doing? You're wasting our time. Come on.
Yeah, that's right. I'll go.
You expect the budget to at least give you some rage fuel, and it hasn't even really given that. I think it's such a fucking boring budget. Like there really are a few things. I guess the Greens were highlighting like that handout for fossil fuels and comparing that to, you know, money for renewables or disaster relief. And otherwise just talking about handouts for billionaires, and I think housing was the other big one that they were kind of attacking, because it's not new. Again, none of this stuff is new though, like the $13 billion in tax breaks for property speculators that the Greens been talking about. That's shocking and it's awful, but it's not new. It's just a continuation. Like the fact that there's no new money for affordable housing, it is just continuing the status quo. And even the first home buyers grant that the coalition's talking about, like, oh, we're going to help people buy a home. They're just continuing the same scheme, which is an incredibly shit scheme anyway. Like it's just going to lock people into mortgages that are going to be harder for them to pay with a smaller deposit.
Yeah, no, exactly, Emerald. And I think, there's a banality of evil in the whole thing. Like, the housing crisis is worse than it's ever been. Like, you're in Lismore right now. There is a genuine, unprecedented social crisis going on there. Like hundreds of thousands, if not, millions of people's lives across the country are being made worse and destroyed by the political decisions of the Liberal Party. And I would argue if Labor were ever in government, probably only slightly better than that. But because it, it's sort of like a frog in slow boiling water. It's not a shock to the system in a way. We'll spend some time critiquing the budget, but our critiques certainly on the ground here in Griffith are much more broadly and structural. What has politics been doing to you over the last 10 years plus? And then spending a lot of time just talking about things that we could do to change it, because I think people will only get angry and engaged when they realize that there's something different possible.
Yeah.
And that's why I probably think people have seen such a muted response to the budget as well. I think that's vaguely the position of a lot of people, even who aren't engaged in politics. They're like, yeah, well, what would be different about this? This seems like what's usually happens.
Yeah.
Which is a bit depressing to talk about.
Nothing for rent relief, though. Why not?
This is about Australians getting into homes. Best way to support people who are renting a house is to help them buy a house.
Let's just stay on housing for a second, because this also caused a bit of a hoo-ha, particularly in response when he was trying to sell the budget. Morrison was out there saying that their first home loan scheme and the measures they introduced in this budget helping people get saddled with insane debts earlier was about Australians getting into homes. Morrison said the best way to support people renting a house is to help them buy a house. Morris said the expansion of the home loan guarantee scheme, which allows people to borrow up to 95% of the value of their property without having to take out mortgage insurance, was support for the people struggling with rental affordability, because people buying homes are renters. Now,
so good. So good to hear. I'm excited. As a renter.
Really great angle. Let's lay out for good people why that's fucking insane. And another example of Conservative governments or politics as usual being completely unable to deal with the housing affordability crisis in this country.
Yeah, well, firstly...
Deep breath.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot to go through. I mean, first off, over the last year, it hasn't been first home buyers buying homes. It's been investors.
Yeah.
If you look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics wealth stats, there was a 64% or thereabouts increase in bank lending to investors to purchase homes. There was a 3% increase for first home buyers, or owner occupiers even, less than for first home buyers. The housing boom over the last 12 months has been entirely driven by investments in property, because property is treated as a commodity, something to be bought and sold and have money made off it. The thing about the first home owners grant as well is functionally, it doesn't actually do anything to improve housing affordability. If we understand that the tax rules are written via negative gearing and capital gains tax exemptions, all that does is pump more money into the housing market for investors to profit off. And yeah, I mean, look, renters, the best thing that Morrison could do for renters that she'll never do would be cap rent increases. But again,
what?
Not something that necessarily they're going to do. But this whole debate is complete. Man, Q&A was on last night and they didn't have any Greens on, as per the ABC's policy of pretending like the Greens don't exist. And this young guy got up and said, hey, everyone on the panel, what are you going to do about the fact I don't think I'll ever own a home in my life? And everyone basically said nothing.
Yeah.
Because there was a Labor and Liberal politician and an independent and Jackie Lambie. And then none of them could say anything, because none of them want to touch the fundamentals of the way the Australian economy functions, which is driving up house asset prices for investors. So screw them.
No, you're exactly. We were getting, I mean, I think we've spoken a little bit. Maybe one day we'll have a proper rant about the media just completely fucking ignoring the Greens. And it is pretty fucking insane that when we are the third biggest party in Australia, we're just completely excluded from theoretically the most significant, or one of the most significant national discussions of the federal budget ahead of an election. Yeah. And I often, not to get too conspiratorial, but it's it does feel like that's because our ideas actually have a chance of fucking structurally changing the economic system in which we live. And that our solution isn't just fucking more private ownership. It's actually public housing.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Tom and I were trying to figure this out before. I hadn't even seen this change, but the Greens policy on negative gearing, has that changed? Because we had thought that previously it was to phase out negative gearing, starting with, from when the policy comes into place, there'll be new investments that people can't use negative gearing on.
Yeah.
But then suddenly now there's coverage where we're saying investors with more than one investment property.
As I understand it, it's phased out over 5 years, and people with one investment property, so there's 1.7 million people, bizarrely enough, in Australia with one, are allowed to continue to negatively gear that property. But after that 5 years, I think it's completely phased out for anyone.
Right.
After that 5 years. I think there's a policy principle there and there's a political principle, and the political principle is, there is a small, and I think often completely overblown, but there is a layer of people who that might form some part of their retirement package. And, I think if we're going to build a political coalition in this country, really our enemies are the banks and property developers and billionaires. And so if that means bringing together a political coalition that includes that 1.7 million people who we can convince have more interests in taxing billionaires and massive property investors, and they should side with us and not them, then I suppose that's a good thing. But yeah, it's a good question. Like, for instance, why not all of them?
Yeah, and perhaps, but maybe this is a bit reformist brain, but it's like, I guess the rationale is that is working within a system that privileges private ownership, that allows people to take on new mortgages and investments in, an entirely predatory kind of lending market with private banks. And in a situation where the government has done nothing to actually bring down housing prices, those people are already being kind of fucked over and preyed upon by the private housing system that commodifies housing, and that pensions have been completely, eroded. And so they have to look somewhere else to be able to fucking live comfortably when they retire at, fucking 70 or whatever it'll be by the time they retire.
Yeah.
So all of those things combined, it's true that they aren't really the enemy.
No, it's true. Absolutely. And I think it's sort of tangential, but it's also one of the reasons why I think the sections of the left get into trouble with universalism, or leaning towards wanting to means test. Like, why should someone on $200,000 a year, for instance, get free childcare? And, the left said it's best when it is able to speak about broad social rights, and a comfortable retirement should be a broad social right.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no problem with a wealthy person making sure they have a home and a comfortable retirement, or access to free childcare, or access to dental, because those aren't the people that are holding us back. They don't wield the power in this economy. They're not the ones banging the cash for access meetings or hiring politicians to run their companies in retirement so they can rig the economy in their favor. And, I think that's a broader discussion to have as well, which is like getting beyond this concept that there's some sort of moral virtue in, directing our policies to only help the most worse off.
Yeah.
Which, that's hard to push through. I will say that the vast majority of people who aren't politics brained agree that things should be universal. And universalism is probably one of our most popular principles. So there's that, which is nice.
Everyone's a winner, baby. That's no lie. That's no lie. You'll never fail to satisfy.
Even the concept of the ABC's budget winners and losers was just making me really laugh this year. I think in previous years I haven't thought too much about it, and then I was posting the a couple of the tiles from the ABC's winners and losers thing, where they decide who the winners and who the losers are from the budget. And I posted that on Twitter, and I had someone from the States reply and be like, what is this? Because it's just winner, women, loser, renewables, or winner, cybersecurity. And it's just what the fuck is this? And the fact that, the ABC is just fucking loser. Young people, losers again. Welfare recipients, loser.
Big L.
Refugees were winners according to this budget.
Yeah.
First home buyers are winners. See, I mean, that is fucking misleading, right? To say that first home buyers are winners out of this budget because of a tiny scheme that will give some people on low incomes, a quicker access to a mortgage and saddle them with this massive debt for an overpriced housing market. And that even those people are such a tiny percentage of the number of people who are buying first homes or doing anything to address the crisis. That is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
And across the board, the reporting of the budget is always so oh, they've announced $30 million for X. It's like, okay, is that enough to do the thing that we need to do in that area?
Yeah.
Like, I don't fucking know. I'm an ordinary person. These numbers are so far outside my concept of how much money is required to do anything.
So true.
The lack of journalism, analysis of any of that is like fucking infuriating, I reckon, yeah.
It actually does seem like more than in previous years, the ABC's winners and losers thing. This time, they've literally just been like, if there is any money in the budget for this particular thing, it's a winner, which is why like they had the Great Barrier Reef, which is going to die. Like it's dying.
No, they didn't say that was a winner, did they?
But they had it as a winner. No, the Great Barrier Reef is a winner, baby. Yeah, so that's really great. And women.
Imagine the ABC journo writing that.
I know.
Imagine the ABC journo being like, yeah, all right, so Great Barrier Reef, and they're like hand hovering over the like button, being like, winner.
Over the button.
They're like, bam, ABC declared winner.
Yeah.
That is actually incredible. Who makes this decision? Because the Reef one, that's insane.
It is insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the first home buyer ones is hilarious.
I'm ready. Here we go. I've got it in front of me here. It had already been announced, but the budget includes the $1 billion for the Great Barrier Reef the government flagged earlier this year. The majority of the funding will go towards improving water quality, with the rest set aside for reef management and research, blah, 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 blah. Last paragraph. But some experts criticise the spend, saying it would mean nothing if global carbon emissions aren't reduced. You fucking reckon, mate?
Yes, that's the whole point. The number one threat to the reef is climate change. Like,
yeah.
And climate spending is being cut in this fucking budget.
Man, there's all those journalists on Twitter who are like, oh, yeah, we're the best. And like, that principle that like, if someone says it's raining and someone says it's not raining, you just go outside and you check if it's raining.
You just need to look outside.
Yeah. And then it cuts to the ABC being like, some say that $1 billion is good. Others say that like historic world global warming and like the general destruction of the climate is bad. Who can say is right? Anyway, we've clicked the winner button and the Great Barrier Reef's won. That's the most crazy thing. Not only have they said, oh, who can say who's the winner here? They then just said it's the fucking winner after in the sentence. Like, there's been like how many bleachings, like historic bleachings of the oceans of the.
We literally just had one.
Like the fucking like UN and like every international organization that like the Liberals don't and Labor don't be like, please don't say this is in crisis, because again, everything is just discourse and language now. And if you say something isn't happening, it's not happening, which is again why people are switched off from politics.
On the one hand, the government says this. On the other hand, experts say this. Who could possibly work it out? Good luck, everyone. You decide.
Winner.
Yeah, that's right. Winner. Well, and first home buyer is also an absolute sick joke. I think, again, it'd be good to send an ABC journo out and knock on renters' doors and be like, did you know you're a winner? You've won.
Congratulations, you've won.
It's like cuts to some. Yeah, I mean, again, but that is like on a serious note, how sick and broken is journalism in this country, where we are literally in the worst housing crisis in Australia's recorded history. Like, housing prices and rents went up faster than ever recorded by the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ABC are running articles being like, oh, what do we think? Maybe we should do rent caps. Or like, yeah, there's this housing crisis, but who can say what we can do about it? Like, maybe there's just nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
But then declare that first homeowners are winners. You can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not journalism.
Yeah. And then the Greens will literally introduce a bill for rent caps that will, or like to ban rent bidding, things that will actually address the housing crisis, or to, build public homes. And they'll just be like, oh, we were sleeping. We were busy. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in the state election, I haven't told many people this. We had made all these announcements during the state election, and I had chatted to this ABC journo and was like, hey, you guys haven't run a single one of our announcements. Is there any point in us even pitching to you anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And this journo was like, I won't say who, but was like, no, probably not.
Yeah.
There's no point pitching to us. And
Jesus,
it was like, oh, good to hear this in like explicit terms. Hilariously, we then announced like the next day, because I was like, well, I'm not going to give you this story. Then we announced like free school breakfasts, and it got a great run in some other channels. And I got an angry call from the ABC chief of staff in Brisbane being like, or one of their chief of staffs being like, why didn't you give us that story? And I was like, one of your journalists told us not to pitch anymore. And she was like, oh, I'm surely not. And then I forwarded her on the email. Anyway, their argument, of course, like the journo's argument, especially around all this housing stuff or any of those announcements, is like, yeah, but the Greens can't do anything about it. And it's such a self-defeating argument, but it's like, sure, as long as you play a role in like shrinking the scope of political debate to the point where people don't think politics is at all worth paying attention, of course nothing is going to change.
Yeah.
In the end, the media, including the ABC, as an institution, functionally work to protect the status quo. Hence why we door knock a lot and build on the ground campaigns.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like you fucking said, when you door knock, surprise, surprise, it is completely different to what outlets, including the ABC, are running. And people are not talking about, they're not using Labor talking points about future generations paying off debt.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing that we were talking about, that they will just uncritically report on, you know, Labor and the kind of the centrist line about like fucking debt and deficit, which no one would ever fucking think about if they didn't report it.
No.
Well, it's interesting because some people are thinking about this shit because they are constantly told about it from the media class. And I'm interested in your thoughts, Max. If you watched Q&A last night, you might have seen that young person, Talia, it couldn't have been more than 25. The question that they chose to ask in this moment of crisis with all the problems facing young Australians today, ask the panel, do you expect my generation to pay off all this debt in this budget?
Oh, God.
What did you think of that? I found it really depressing that this young person like identified this as the major issue.
So depressing.
And more broadly, you know, this has been a big attack from the Labor Party in response to the budget, is that there's $1 trillion of debt and nothing to show for it. What do you think about all that wonderful discourse?
Oh, but again, this is why I think, with regards to that question, I don't know who this person was, but like I've done it quite a bit. I've not had a single person ever bring up a question like that. Certainly not a young person, that how we're going to pay off the debt and deficit. But that debt and deficit conversation does speak to, and why Labor are picking to target it. It does, again, speak to that thing I was talking about earlier, which is that there is a broadly speaking an economic consensus in Australia. And like while COVID saw that briefly suspended, this concept that you actually, if we wanted to, could spend enough money to lift people out of poverty, which they did briefly, is reverting to the mean. And that basically is the concept that the major parties don't function to represent or improve people's lives. Broadly speaking, they want to ensure the continued accumulation of capital and wealth for the wealthy few. They want the economy to continue to function in that way. Whenever they both speak about the national interest, that doesn't mean the 26 plus million people in Australia. The national interest means the continued functioning of the economy in a way that concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a small few. And that began, broadly speaking, with Hawke and Keating and has been a basic national consensus ever since. And the fight has been on the fringes. And so, look, depressing to hear, but again, probably not surprising. And again, I think why it's hard to get super angry about the budget, because it's just a continuation of that status quo. Man, I can't believe someone asked that.
I'm just looking at this Labor meme, right? I don't know if you saw this. I know it's wild. But the Labor Party's gone for it. They've got Morrison and Frydenberg back to back, and it says a Liberal Party production, Debt Doublers, the movie.
Oh, Jesus.
And there's all this money flying around them, and it's like the front of a DVD, I guess, like trying to sell a movie. I have no idea what it's trying to parody in any way.
These people are sick.
But up the top it says they managed to double the debt before the pandemic hit and they have no plan to fix it. It's rated EG, Economic Guidance Recommended.
Oh.
And it's from No Hope Cinema. I mean,
Wow.
there's so much going on.
That's cool. Cool and funny.
I just wanted to quickly say on that debt and deficit question as well. What's hilarious about it is Labor have explicitly agreed to support and maintain the stage 3 tax cuts, which will cost $184 billion over the next 10 years. And so when they talk about bringing down the debt and deficit, functionally and explicitly what that means is chronically underfunding health and education and other services. Like,
yes.
They're pretty much screaming at everyone that that's what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, their other argument is that they will get out of that debt position by growing the economy.
Oh, God.
But of course, like this is obviously data stuff, which can go very bullshit, is that more unequal societies, that's actually a drag on economic growth. Okay, so the more unequal your society is, the less, the growth dividend that's going to come off those tax cuts is so tiny and minimal and will obviously continue to make this society even more unequal than it already is, which is bad.
Yes. Yeah.
And should be against the Labor mission, one would have thought.
It's sort of like saying, the way they always say, and again, this is a bit technical, the way we'll increase wages is by increasing productivity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Except that productivity has gone up for the last 30 years and by and large wages haven't.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those maddening things where journos will repeat it as well and go, oh yes, well, we do need to increase productivity to increase wages. Like actually Labor and workers have become more productive significantly over the last 20 years and there hasn't been a comparative wage increase.
Yeah.
Almost as if the economy in Australia and a lot of major capitalist countries these days are set up to capture all of that increased wealth that workers create and then funnel it up to people like Clive Palmer.
Which is why it's funny then that Labor will quite openly be like, okay, our plan if we win the election is to support businesses. And that's the way that we, apparently support wages. And yet the Australian Council of Trade Unions is still backing them in as the party for workers. And I'm sure, if you're on Twitter, you would have seen, I don't know if any non-hacks would have even noticed, but the morning of budget, we all wake up to signs across the country that have been distributed by the ACTU, Council of Trade Unions, which appear to be its most significant campaign tactic for the election so far. These yard signs with photos of Scott Morrison, often wearing his little Hawaiian head thing. And they've got phrases like, doesn't hold a hose, or not my job. The only job he cares about is his own. Yeah. And so they're just plastering the electorate with the face of their opponent. And that's their plan to help workers and lift wages.
Have you seen how Albanese integrated into this? When he shared his budget response video and he's like...
No, what do you mean?
He was like, Australians need a prime minister that will hold a hose. And it was like...
What does that mean?
Fucking hell. What does that mean?
I will say, in terms of lowering expectations and being they're like, look, we won't fix the housing crisis. Yeah, climate change, we're all going to burn.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I'll be holding a hose the whole time. And what I want to know from Anthony Albanese is, will he permanently hold a hose? Will it be that at every press conference he's holding a hose? Because otherwise it's another Labor broken promise.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so true.
And Greens in the balance of power will push to permanently fuse a hose to Anthony Albanese's hand. So he's constantly...
Yeah. Are you holding a hose right now, Max? I hope so.
Well,
just out of frame.
In a way, this is an ideas hose because it's a pen, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's so true.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hose of ideas. This is where we should put in the elbow grab of his incredible slam.
The only time that this government holds a hose is to spray money around before an election.
Sorry, carry on.
First time is a tragedy, second time is a farce, third time is a sad trickle. Because
yes,
that the Australian trade union movement at a moment of historic low wage growth subordinates their entire organisation towards a series of completely farcical yard signs is another good example of how sick and broken Australian politics is. But, we've seen this, because, you had changed the rules in 2019 and
yeah,
I think that campaign partly failed because they couldn't admit that Labor wrote most of the rules that they wanted changed.
Yes.
It was Rudd that introduced the Fair Work Act in 2008. And, this is probably an entirely other podcast, but the Australian trade union movement's leadership has essentially subordinated and restricted workplace organising and decided that their entire influence will be exerted via political organising and politics in the Labor Party.
Yeah.
Which has significantly contributed to historic low wage growth and decline in union membership.
Their entire campaign strategy is just, we think Scott Morrison is unlikable and that the electorate doesn't like him. And so that's our campaign. And it's the same. I was thinking about this because I was like, it's the same in the way that they everyone foaming at the mouth seized upon that outgoing Liberal senator's speech. What's her name? Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells. No one at me for my bad pronunciation.
Senator Fierravanti-Wells.
Many in this place would be aware of the history I've had with Scott Morrison. Let me give some clarity and context to that history. Morrison and Hawke have ruined the Liberal Party in New South Wales. An autocrat, a bully who has no moral compass. Our members do not want to help in the upcoming election. They have lost faith in the party. They want to leave. They don't like Morrison and they don't trust him. They continue to despair at our prospects at the next federal election and they blame Morrison for this. Morrison is not fit to be Prime Minister.
Senator Wish-Wilson.
Holy smokes. Acting Deputy President, I'm happy to offer another 5 minutes to Senator Fervanti-Wells if she'd like to continue.
But yeah, when she gets up on budget night, this is a Liberal senator who is not going to be re-elected because she's basically being fucked over by the party and put, at the bottom of the Senate ticket in an unwinnable spot effectively. And she gets up on budget night and gives a speech just going the fuck after Scott Morrison and other key Liberal figures. But she's not going after them like, it's fucked up that they lock up refugees in detention camps. It's fucked up that they're driving millions of people into poverty and, burning our fucking kids' futures. It's bad because these individuals in the party aren't doing for the Liberal Party that I love what I want them to do. And she's like calling Scott Morrison a bully. She said that he had no moral compass. He's an autocrat. He's not fit to be Prime Minister. And the media and I think the political class and Labor aligned people and Labor in particular seize upon that. And they're like, yes, this is it. This is the election campaign. He's not fit to be PM.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't give a fuck who leads the Liberal Party. They're a heinous, poisonous institution that is like fundamentally evil and should be abolished and fucking driven into the ground. Like, I do not give a shit if Scott Morrison leads it or not. And it reminds me, it's exactly the same as like in the States, that intense focus on Trump as the evil head of the Republicans, when it's like, actually, the Republican Party has always been evil. It's not just Trump being a fucking, bumbling idiot that means you should vote for the Democrats.
Well, you saw that rehabilitation of George Bush as well.
Yeah. Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah.
And John,
I know. And that's one of the sort of maddening hypocrisies of Australian politics is what is considered like parliamentary and what's considered morally repugnant and what's not. And I think about, there's all these decisions and votes that the politicians make in Canberra that destroy people's lives.
Yeah.
Even if you just had ABC profile or who a media profile one of these people, you just looked at what their government decisions had done to that person's life, say for 30 minutes. Say it was when Labor and Liberal Party voted together to cut job seeker back well below the poverty line. There are families out there for whom they are just living a miserable life. Like their kids will remember what that period, that of intense poverty for the rest of their lives. But because it's the normal operations of Parliament, that's not considered morally repugnant or making you unfit for office, because that's how politics works and you have to make tough decisions. And I think this is, again, partly why people switch off from politics, because it's like, bullying and stuff is like, that's awful, and treating people badly, really awful. But why isn't that outrage and discourse pointed towards when politicians then turn around and not only like bully or intimidate one person, but ruin the lives of millions of people and make explicit political decisions that do that? And I find it maddeningly hypocritical. You see that discourse happen all the time, and you watch politicians speak, like get on a high horse about something, and you look at them and multiple times have, whether it be destroying, like domestic violence is a good one, where it's like, I'm sick of this like discourse around it that never really grapples with the fact that, hey, 2 ways you could really fix domestic violence is stop chronically underfunding public housing and bring back the single parents pension so that if women escape abusive relationships, they don't have to live in poverty. 2 really basic things you could do.
It's like Julia Gillard's misogyny speech, right? Where she gets up and, absolutely slams Tony Abbott for being a misogynist and is still hailed as like a champion for women's rights because of that. While in the same week or even on the same day.
Literally same day.
Yeah. She voted to
cut the single parents pension.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
it really, with all these stories, it really does seem like the interpersonal relationships and bullying accusations within the tiny select number of people in the political class is like being turned into a major election issue, as if, I mean, as you say, bullying is bad. Everyone in every workplace should be treated with respect, yada, yada, yada. But it's like, it literally does seem to be that the way that politicians interact with each other in their own workplace is being lauded as like a major political issue, that as if it affects everybody else's lives. It's just such bullshit,
Yeah. And also, like, I hate to break it to you folks, politicians, but actually the public thinks that you're all fucking evil pieces of shit. Like, they're not thinking, oh, there's some good ones and some bad ones. They hate you all.
Yes.
And then even, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff like, all the staff are tackling the abuse of power by politicians towards their staffers and all of these like educational courses. And it's like, even at that level, it's like, the one way to fix that would be just to make it so staffers can't be fired for no reason by politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That would go a long way to protecting the rights of staffers in Canberra. But what was frustrating, there was then never a broader conversation about the chronic and continued abuse of power by bosses towards workers in all sorts of workplaces.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I used to briefly work for United Voice, which is the union that, like in the call centre, that represents cleaners and teacher aides. And the number of times you'd speak to people who vaguely would insinuate that basically their boss was just destroying their lives, like bullying them and harassing them.
Yeah.
Again, it's just one of those hypocritical things, because you know how to fix that? Give workers back their right to strike, which, by the way, was Labor that banned that. Like, if you want to stop sexual harassment in the workplace, it's not the only way, but one of the ways to do it is to give workers power collectively in their workplace to push back against abuses of power.
Or code of conduct,
Yeah.
You could have a nice agreement that everyone can sign that nobody actually adheres to. That's another option too. Did you think about that, Max?
No, I didn't.
Pivot just briefly so that we don't run out of time, because I do want to talk about Griffith a bit more and Queensland politics. I feel like I think of you, Max, as kind of the expert on the Queensland Greens over the past 5 years and the rise that the Queensland Greens have been happening. And it feels like that is really hitting fever pitch. It's like culminating so far in this campaign to win Griffith and kind of the campaigns, in the inner city in Brisbane in this election. How different is this campaign, do you think, for you so far than it was to 2019?
Different in a few ways. I think it's different in the sense that there's just been a continued natural growth in the capacity and organisation of the party. You take what we did in 2019 and essentially what we're doing is tripling it in size. And that's resulted in recruiting a broader layer of very experienced door knockers and training them over years, and to the point now where we have a large layer of organisers who, there's almost a perpetual motion to it at some point. Once you get, say, to that layer of about 100 people who can go and door knock and train other people, then they start recruiting in their social networks. And so there's been a natural growth. The other big one is that we've just, resources-wise, we're much better at fundraising. And so that allows us to pay more organisers.
Yeah.
I think that's given us a much bigger foundation than we've ever had before. And with that resources comes time to engage in more creative and broader scope of campaigning. Qualitatively, the biggest shift between 2019 and now is our embracing of community organising. And functionally what that meant was, say, during the floods, we had the capacity to suspend our campaign for a week and help hundreds of people effectively in all sorts of ways, cleaning up, delivering free food and water, helping ferry people around the electorate when public transport was closed, essentially spread out a network of volunteers and organisers across the south side of Brisbane to help them to recover from the floods. And we've been helping people plant community gardens, run community festivals, help push back against people being evicted from public housing. And that's probably the biggest qualitative shift, under the idea that if the Greens are going to grow as a party, we need to be a social party embedded in people's lives permanently, where we're not just arguing for change, we're directly materially changing people's lives that are right now. That's the bit that really excites me, actually, probably the big qualitative shift from 2019.
And that's also effectively kind of emulating what it would be like if you had a federal MP, right, and an office that would be able to provide that kind of support before you're even elected, which I think is really interesting. I mean, it's a bit of like, just fake it till you make it. Just act like the MP.
Well, the explicit strategy at the start was to pretend like we were the incumbents.
Yeah.
We put out community newsletters. We offer constituent help. We have an office in the middle of the electorate. And we'll be sending out a letter to all those people who we've helped or worked with over the last 12 months and being very explicit and saying, hey, hopefully you've been given a preview of what having a Greens MP would look like.
Yeah. Do you like your free trial?
Yeah, that's right. No, that's it. Your free trial is ending. We have a lot of plans if we do win. So many different things. The one I bang on about the most is I'm very excited about using the resources of a federal MP's office to run a free breakfast program and partner with one of the public schools in the electorate. And stuff like that. If we can get the proof of concept right, I just think it would be cool if everyone knew, if you were moving into Griffith, you knew you were moving into an electorate where your kids might get a free breakfast. If you're doing it tough, we'll drop off a free box of food.
Yeah.
If you want help planting a community garden, we'll send organisers around. You know, a little welfare state within a state. And I think that is sort of the future of the left in general, actually.
The Republic of Griffith.
That's right. We will be declaring independence from Australia.
And just for listeners' benefit, I mean, but that's a bigger strategy as well. Like, you know, you've got John O'Shree as the local councillor within this same area. You've got Amy McMahon, who won the 2020 state election to win the lead of South Brisbane. So you've got Greens representatives at the local and the state election, and you are going for the trifecta in Griffith to try and get all three levels
hat trick
of the Greens communist government imposed on the good people of Griffith.
I wouldn't describe it as that, Tom.
Well, too late.
I mean, all of that work that you're doing, Griffith, though, it's not really going to be that you win with. Presumably, it'll be the fact that people from Melbourne have moved into Queensland, as we learned from The Guardian this week.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see this article?
Yeah, I saw it. I mean, this is one of the things where journalists in general, I don't think it's an individual failing, but it's more a class thing, are determined not to believe that anything we do has an effect on the electorate.
Yeah.
Like, if the Greens win, it's demographics or liberal preferences or something. But it's never that we're building a massive grassroots movement that's fundamentally changing the way people think about politics.
For background, like this is, the article, if folks haven't seen it, it's in The Guardian. It's basically saying that there will likely be a shift towards Labor or the Greens maybe the Greens in the federal election in Queensland because there was so much interstate migration from cities like Melbourne and Sydney during the pandemic in particular, and that those people are inherently more progressive than Queenslanders. And so like implicit in this is this fucking old ass idea that Queenslanders are inherently conservative, which I know is like one of our bugbears. It's a thing that we're constantly pushing shit uphill to try to explain to people that that's not the case, and yet it still fucking persists.
Yeah, I know. It's often an excuse as well, I think, for people outside of Queensland to justify their own states or countries like Australia's general crappy politics. We even run training sessions where we explain in detail why that concept that Queensland is inherently conservative is wrong.
Yeah.
If anything, actually, I would argue Queenslanders in general are more radical. Like any social poll you see basically shows they hate the political system more than other states.
Yeah.
Which is probably why our political movement has emerged in Queensland as opposed to other states for that reason. Like it's explicit politics, the way it conceives of politics as something largely disconnected and hostile to people's lives. Maybe it's the case that there's a reason that it's emerged in Queensland as opposed to another state.
Love you, Brisbane. Yes, you mean the world to me.
All right, we've got to wrap it up, but we have a call to action. We like to let people know what they can do to help out, to make the world better, and to reject the shitty political status quo. We'll talk generally in a sec, but I mean specifically for the Griffiths campaign, if people around the Griffith area want to help out, what kind of stuff you got coming up, Max? What would you like people to get involved with?
So much. Basically, there's too much, but functionally there's going to be only a few weeks left in this election until it's called, and our goal is to basically double the number of one-on-one conversations we've had up until this point. So we want to get another basically 16,000 conversations. To do that, we need a bunch of new volunteers. So if you are interested in getting involved, finding out what it's all about, just jump on maxforgriffith.com/volunteer, sign up, an organizer will get in touch. You can help letterboxing, you can help putting up yard signs, you can help door knocking. If you're worried about door knocking, don't worry, we have training sessions and you get partnered up with an experienced person. So you don't even have to do anything for the first few times. You just watch how it's done. And then maybe you decide you don't want to, or you do decide that you do. And I will say that if you are feeling powerless, and we talked about a lot of bleak things, there is nothing more meaningful than going to someone's door and shifting the way they think about politics. I've lost count of the number of times people come back from their first door knock with a glint in their eyes. And that glint, I think, is hope and possibility. When you change someone's mind, it's proof of concept that the strategy works. It's just that we need to build the capacity to reach everyone. That's what I get excited about and why I door knock every day.
Aww. Yeah, cool. That's very sweet.
Good on you, sir.
It's it is nice to have some hope. If you're not in Griffith as well, folks, please. I mean, Max, you said in the next few weeks election call, but people are saying it could be by the time this episode comes out. I don't know, but it'll be called very soon.
Ooh.
I have heard just another maddening fact about politics. The political analysis I heard is that they won't announce the election until as late as possible, like Friday of next week.
Yeah.
Or this coming week, rather, because the government wants to get more election ads out there, which aren't election ads. So while they haven't called the election, the government can fund these massive bullshit ad campaigns telling them how fucking great the Australian government is, and it's not political advertising, and they can use taxpayers' money in order to fund it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think generally they'll leave it as long as possible, but hey, I'll be eating my words if it's already been announced when you're listening to this.
Sure.
But either way, I know probably all of the campaigns, it's like suddenly I felt my brain switch gears this week. I'm sure you've already been in this for ages, Max, but like for me, this week was when I was like, okay, I've got full election brain now. Like it's all I can think about. It feels like it's really happening. It's just the home stretch. And now it's like for all of the campaigns, they need to make sure there are people on the booths on election day. So I feel like the number one thing is make sure that even if you can't do anything else, even if you can't door knock or you can't volunteer or whatever leading up to the election, for the 2 weeks of pre-poll and at least election day, we need people on the booths, because that'll literally be that, people say it's as much as 2% extra that we can win on the booths just by having a Greens presence.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to greens.org.au/volunteer, that'll kind of assign you to your local campaign, or just get in touch with your local campaign and ask to be rostered on a booth. I think that there may even be a self-rostering system coming out soon from the Greens, so that'll make that even easier to do. The other thing that we were going to encourage people to do is just check that your enrollment is up to date.
Yes.
Probably the hacks listening to this already have, but you never know. Please fucking check aec.gov.au/enroll and tell like 3 friends to check, especially young people in share houses, people who move a lot. Make sure that their enrollment is up to date. Post about it on your social media. Make sure everyone's actually enrolled, because that window to update it will be closing very soon.
Max-Chandler Mather, you're a hero. Thanks very much for joining us on the show and being our co-host for the whole ep, man. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. You're both heroes as well. We're all heroes.
Thanks, Max.
Obviously. Yes, that's implied. We say that every week. Serious Danger is produced by Michael Griffin and made possible with the help of the Green Institute. You can rate and review the show on Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at Serious Danger AU. Thank you to the beautiful patrons who make this show possible. We love you. Patreon.com/Serious Danger AU. You can email us anytime. hello@seriousdangerpod.com. Thank you, everyone. Yay!
Yay!
Bye.
Serious Danger Australia.